Hi, fourth graders. Um, we are continuing our read of Out of My Shell, which is a great book. I hope you're enjoying it as much as I am. And we are going to begin on page 129, which is chapter 14. And there's a little fun fact about loggerhead turtles. Loggerhead sea turtles build their nest primarily at night. You know, I thought about that. How do they do that? You know, how do they see to build their nest at night? It's amazing. It's just one of those wonders of nature. All right, so page 129. Other people would only let me down. That was the conclusion I drew from all of this. Dad, Aiden, Mom, they'd all failed me in different ways. But it wasn't like I was any better. I'd failed my family. I'd caused a commotion when I'd taken off on the trolley, and then a bigger mess by my vandalizing Beachcomber property. I couldn't depend on my family, but they couldn't depend on me either. It was best for everyone if I kept to myself. I would avoid them all and remain in my room as much as possible, but I could never give up the beach. When the mob had been around, Mom mostly stayed put in the same room as Aunt Michelle after dark. But with Lainey sleeping in Mom's room again, she took to roaming the house that night. I could sense her restlessness through the walls. The rhythm of her footsteps on the landing outside my room was more wandering than purposeful. She was pacing, sleepless in part because of me, no doubt. The one time it grew quiet and I thought she'd finally retreated to her and Lainey's room, I peeked out my door only to find the light on at the bottom of the stairs. Eventually, I fell asleep, waiting for her to go to bed. As soon as I woke the next morning, I crept outside. There was nothing but a growing crack of sunlight along the bottom edge of the darkened sky. I went directly to my secret place between the dunes and collected yet another mermaid tear. I briefly marveled at where all the pieces of sea glass were coming from. Then I wandered farther down the beach until I was facing the Beachcomber. By then, the sun had risen enough to peek over the inn in a rounded glow instead of a thin orange line. A woman sat drinking coffee on a balcony outside of one of the rooms. She smiled and seemed totally unaware of the duress her accommodations were causing the turtle. I wondered if she would have been less friendly if she'd known I was responsible for shattering the pool light. I also wondered where Aiden was and when he'd visit again, if he'd visit again. When I remembered telling him to just leave me alone, my heart felt tender in the way a bruise does when you run your finger across it. I spun away from the inn and faced the ocean. That's when I saw the tracks and pushed everything else from my mind. They'd been partially erased by early morning beachgoers, but they were there if you knew what to look for. Trying not to get my hopes up, I followed the turtle treads to a place beyond the next dune where the sand looked sifted, swirled, and slightly indented. I knew instantly what I was looking at, and my heart thrummed happily inside my chest. She'd made it. The sea turtle had finally come all the way ashore. She'd made a nest. She'd made a nest, but she'd made it here. The spot was far from ideal. It was near the gate and the picket fence surrounding the inn's pool. It was too close to the trail the guests took to the ocean. Then there were the chairs and umbrellas occasionally left strewn across the sand. When the eggs hatched, the baby turtles would need a clear path to the water. And what about the other lights on the Beachcomber Inn, the ones I hadn't smashed? Panic wrapped its pincers around my heart. I'd wanted so badly for the mama turtle to come ashore. I hadn't fully considered what it would mean for her babies. This was not a safe place for them to be born. My feet were running before I thought anything through. I pounded on Mr. Emerson's door seconds later. "Come on, open up," I said to myself as I fidgeted on his front porch. When he didn't answer, I scurried to the front of the inn and inside the lobby. Mr. Emerson was checking in guests at the counter. His eyes flicked in my direction. A pained expression darted across his face before he returned his attention to the couple standing in front of him. I bounced on my toes behind the guests for as long as I could stand it. They seemed like a nice enough young couple. a nice enough couple, young with starry eyes for each other, probably honeymooners or something. Ick. Excuse me, I said, and carved my way between the lovebirds and up to the counter. I need to talk to you, Mr. Emerson. It's not a good time, Olivia, he said. But there's a nest on the beach. As I blurted this out, I caught the guest exchanging a look behind my back, half puzzled, half annoyed. Mr. Emerson came from behind the counter and pulled me aside. I'm happy to hear that, but I can't be involved. I'm already in hot water for not going directly to Mr. Shaw about the broken light. I'm sorry. Before I could explain how the nest was in a terrible location and that he had to get involved, the young woman pushed her way back in front of me. We caught a red-eye flight to get here. We're exhausted. If you could just show us to our suite, we'd really like to get some rest. Of course, Mr. Emerson said, turning from me and grabbing the woman's bag. Right this way. Please, I pleaded. I wanted to say that something had to be done, a barrier put around the nest so it wouldn't be disturbed. The path needed to be kept clear, and someone had to see that they made it safely to the ocean. Mr. Emerson could do all that. He was the inn's caretaker after all, but he and the couple were bustling away. There was nothing I could do but watch them go. For a dizzying moment, I felt like I was free falling. I wasn't sure where to turn. Dad was thousands of miles away. I no longer had my phone, but I'd given up on relying on others anyway, hadn't I? I didn't want all the complications and expectations that came along with other people's involvement. But I had to do something about the nest. I thought back to the turtle skeleton Dad and I found years ago, and then to the dozens of eggs buried beneath the sand, buried in a not so great location. I couldn't bear for any of them to meet the same fate. I would feel responsible. I was the one who knocked out the pool light. Was that the reason the mama turtle had finally come ashore? There had to be something I could do. I raced home, through the side door of the garage, and then rummaged around till I found a spool of orange twine. With the twine tucked safely under my arm, I made my way back to the beach and began searching for pieces of driftwood large enough to serve as stakes. What you doing? Laney's voice rang out, and I jolted, nearly dropping the armful of sticks I'd gathered. Shh, Laney, you don't want to wake the whole neighborhood. By neighborhood, I meant Mom and our grandparents. Can I help? She asked in a quieter tone. Sure. Carry these, I said, and dumped a few pieces of driftwood into her arms. She followed me back to the nest. I wanted to get the barrier up before the inn's guests started to trickle down to the beach. It wasn't easy to drive the driftwood into the sand, though. I had to dig holes for the makeshift stakes with my bare hands and find a rock to finish pounding the stakes in. An early morning jogger eyed me suspiciously while I was pounding in the last stake. Then I had to move aside to let a large man through the beachcomber gate as I was winding the twine around the pieces of driftwood now sticking straight out of the sand. But finally I encircled the nest. It wasn't as official looking as I'd hoped, but it would do the trick. It would keep people from disturbing the nest. There, I said, feeling a small amount of pride and relief. What is it? Laney asked. She'd been more helpful than I'd anticipated. Not in the actual building of the barrier, but she had retrieved a pair of scissors for me at one point when I needed to cut the twine. It's, I stalled. If she knew about the eggs, she wanted to spend every waking moment watching for the turtles to hatch. Then, next thing I knew, it would become a family affair. She dragged my grandparents and Mom into staking out the nest, and things would go south like they always did with my family. Now that the barrier was up, I was starting to feel better about things, excited even. The barrier would keep the nest safe. Then sometime between 6 to 8 weeks from now, the eggs would hatch. Up until that moment, I'd been dreading the rest of the summer away from Dad, but now I was relieved to know I'd still be in Florida for a while longer. I imagined myself overseeing the hatchlings as they dashed for the waves. Me, not everyone else crowding in. I struggled to come up with a reasonable explanation. Art? Judging by the look on her face, Laney either wasn't convinced or was sorely disappointed in my work. I never found out because as soon as the lie slipped from my lips, Grandma started calling my name. Olivia, there's someone at the door for you. Olivia. If anything could make Laney forget about the driftwood post and twine, it was the intrigue of a visitor at the door. She shot off like a rocket, even though Grandma clearly said the guest was for me. I wasn't all that quick to follow. I expected to find Mr. Emerson at the door, wanting to apologize for having brushed me off again. And at that point, I was convinced I was better off handling everything alone. No one to please, no one to disappoint. The turtle had finally succeeded in coming ashore. I was done trying to keep Mom happy and fool Dad and my friends into thinking I was having a good time. The only thing I cared about now was protecting the nest. But it wasn't Mr. Emerson at the door. It was his grandson, and he was holding 2 sets of snorkel gear in his hands. So we'll stop right there, and tomorrow we'll begin on chapter 15, page 137. Thank you, 4th grade students. Have a good day and take care of yourselves, okay? Bye.